Hello, Iris J here with Madrona's Pulse Teachings, Astrology for Healing, and we have a new moon in Virgo upon us. So I'm going to chat with you about that new moon, the energies that we might be feeling that we can work with intentionally to set some intentions to just come into these Virgo realms a little bit more consciously. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. I talk about things astrology, spirituality related, weaving them in on these journeys of healing and reclaiming that we are on, moments of joy, finding those moments of joy, and how astrology and spirituality can really help us to have the language and the worldview to do that, also the self-view to do that. And please do subscribe. It really, really helps us smaller channels get out there and do our thing amidst these paradigm changes. And I don't know about you, but I am feeling rhythms change. The weather, work rhythms. I'm about to be journeying into urban rhythms for my somewhat rural rhythms. I hope that you're all doing well enough amidst these kind of shifting times that so many of us are in. We see it really in the seasons. Suddenly we have our first fire here, intentional fire in the hearth, in the house, not forest fire. And what does the Virgo new moon have to tell us about these shifting times and these seasons? So firstly, Virgo. Okay, so we're working with that moon and sun together in Virgo. That's what gives us the new moon. And traditionally, the new moon is a time of going within. It's the dark moon. It is when we want to set intentions that are working with the energy. Here we're talking about Virgo. Within the lunar cycle, we're then working with the full moon is sometimes when we see that energy coming into a different type of fruition and illumination within a smaller cycle. Now, when we have larger cycles at play within the lunar cycle, then the intentions that we're working with are simultaneously part of that kind of lunar rhythm, but they're also part of a much bigger cycle that's underway with something like Pluto or Saturn. And I say this because the outer planets are talking with our sun and moon during this new moon. So we can definitely feel into ways that there is some type of evolutionary process underway. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to show you the chart just for that one piece. And so the intentions that we're setting are also most likely weaving into bigger cycles at play. And whenever we have the outer planets working, we're talking about our individual cycles and journeys, but also about the collective. Let's start, however, with Virgo. So Virgo energy at a new moon, we're talking about the Virgo archetypes and earth sign, mind-body connection. It is a mind-body connection, however, that's going to speak strongly through the body, wanting to speak strongly through the body, though Virgo can really go to a heady anxiety place when it's getting too stuck and it needs to flow in those Pisces ways. That's its polar opposite energy. So it's going into the mind-body connection. Virgo is all about our daily life. It's also a devotional practice within that daily life. And that devotion shows up in so many different ways, depending upon how Virgo energy shows up in our own chart. Archetypally, it's a devotional way of living such that it's that polar opposite Pisces, the collective oceanic depths of all that is, the ultimate mystical spiritual experience can flow through into this material plane. So you can have that in mind as you're kind of thinking about what daily devotional practices might mean to you. And this is a wonderful time to come in and set some intentions, especially because our ruler of Virgo, or depending upon your system, one ruler, Mercury, is stationing direct the day after. There's little Finnegan in the back curling up on his little daybed. So Mercury is a ruler associated with Virgo energy, and pretty much as long as we've been in this Virgo season with the sun, that Mercury was retrograde. And now that Mercury is stationing direct, a day or two right after our new moon, Mercury is direct, so it's super slow. It's in that process of shifting. And we might also really feel that, like during the new moon, we might really feel a need to be quite slow because that Mercury, which is also our way of thinking, our way of making meaning, our way of communicating, is in that process of transition. And then it's going to find its forward flow. And also much of that Mercury retrograde was also overlapping our Venus retrograde, and Venus is direct as well. We also have a lot of other planets retrograde, but those two, which are moving faster, are direct, will be direct. And so with that, it's the new moon is just such a potent time to set those intentions around daily devotional practices that are sustaining and really of service to ourselves. Okay, especially think about, are you someone that as you shift into this next season, that whether it's through you have kids or however your life is impacted by the shifts that happen as we enter September, are there habits, daily devotional practices that you need to make to support yourself so that we can then be of service to others? Virgo is absolutely concerned with being of service to others, but Virgo needs not to be a martyr. Because if Virgo is a martyr and everything is under this narrative of being of service, well, then it's going to get exhausted. It's going to get burnout. It's going to get pains and complications in the body that are going to impact mental health, because Virgo has to be of service to its daily body so that it can then be of service to others. So these are some themes that we can be working with around this new moon, really focusing and setting intentions for ourselves. And yet there's more. So these outer planets. Now we touched upon these outer planets when we were talking about the Pisces full moon because they were in play then with the asteroid Athena. Now they are in play with the new moon. Okay, so the sun and the moon. So we have what we would call a kite if we're using astrological termination to describe this situation. You can see it here. And so we have the outer planets. We have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all in combination of sextiles and trines. And then we have the two outer, so that's Uranus and Pluto, reaching down towards the sun and the moon, and then they're opposite that planet Neptune. Okay, now I know there's all different levels here, so I try not to use too much astrological language here. All of this is to say there's a heck of a big conversation going on, okay, between the sun and the moon and those three outer planets. And now, since I've brought in some astrological language, depending upon the astrologer, some work with a really tight orb of 1 or 2 degrees. They're not going to talk about this kite. Okay, others work with really wide orbs, that meaning how the degrees separating planets and aspects and how we figure out all these conversations and layers go up to 12, sometimes 15. Okay, so there's all different ways coming in. For me, this is absolutely a kite, and these planets are talking to each other, especially because the week that follows this new moon, firstly, Mercury is going to go direct. Then the sun and the moon, they're going to keep moving because nothing's stationary. We're always changing. We're always growing. We're always evolving. And the aspects, the relationship to each of these planets is going to change. So when we start out with this new moon, exactly at the moment it's happening, there's an exact link between Uranus. The planet Uranus is in an exact trine to this new moon. Uranus is in Taurus. Then the moon's going to move faster than the sun, and then there's going to be an exact opposition with the planet Neptune, and then an exact trine with the planet Pluto. So, and that's all happening within a week, okay? And really focusing when that aspect is exact for the sun, because we're going to feel that activating our active principle of the ego in a very strong way, potentially. That's just working with all of the energies of this new moon. I do have those dates for you too. The sun's going to be directly opposite Neptune on the 18th of September, and then exact in its trine with Pluto around the 20th. And so what does all this mean? Let's come back to the narrative. You know, when we are having that direct conversation between the sun and the moon with the outer planets, you know, it really does show that whatever is going on right now is part of a much bigger evolutionary process, because these outer planets are the planets and the archetypes of that kind of collective and individual evolutionary process. And so we work with that exact Uranus energy on the actual new moon. Uranus is the awakener. Now, every single one of these outer planets is also retrograde, meaning that they're signaling that, you know, this is common in this time of the year that we have all these planets in retrograde. And when they're in retrograde, something is still being worked out. Okay, so that said, it's happening with that sun in Virgo, where we also have that Mercury who's going direct. We have Venus who's gone direct. So there is still direct motion, but ultimately whatever's coming up in life right now is part of something much bigger. And we could almost leave it at that, but let's get a little bit more clear about these energies. So that Uranus energy, awakening, wanting to awaken something within that psyche, that mind-body connection that's really going to help us move forward, that's really going to help us have insight, that's really going to help us have some type of understanding about our own embodiment in this journey, about what our daily devotion can be, about how it relates to definitely here Earth consciousness, to our body, because we're talking about Uranus in an Earth sign and the sun and the moon are in Virgo. Ultimately, this could be about a life that is much more sustainable for us because it's Uranus as well. And also we've got Jupiter hanging out there in Taurus. These are collective themes about what's sustainable for humanity amidst on this planet Earth, right? So aligning our own lives to what's sustainable for us in a mind-body connection, but also in terms of working with the reality of the Earth's limited resources and human interaction with them. And so, but Uranus itself is just awakening energy. And then we have, and it can be radical. Can be radical awakening energy, and there could absolutely be some radical insights or radical experiences with this new moon because that Uranus energy is exact. Then we have Neptune. We have Neptune who is everything that is beyond the day-to-day. We have that Neptune energy that wants to plant into those seeds of intention something, you know, there could be release, there could be letting go, there could be cycles coming to an end with this Neptune energy, ultimately so that we can move forward in ways that are more about our alignment to oneness, to the divine mystery, to whatever language resonates for you, goddess, Gaia, all that language. And ultimately, Neptune is about taking us beyond absolutely the self. It's the dissolving of the self. And so it's definitely, when we're looking at kind of the way that these planets are working to awaken us and support alignment, this Neptune energy is absolutely about bringing that spiritual energy into our daily life. And if we don't do that, and if our life is focused, maybe for work, we've had to do something, you know, we got bills to pay, we got mouths to feed, we need shelter. Maybe we've adapted and we've had to work in a way that isn't really supporting the spiritual in our life, or maybe we hide the spiritual in our life some way. This is opposite the sun right after that new moon. That spiritual wants to come out in our daily practices, especially in our devotional way of being on the day-to-day, in the mind-body connection as well. And then we've got Pluto. Then we've got Pluto at those, still in retrograde at those final degrees of Capricorn, who is in this great process of unraveling and undoing and breakdown before we enter into Pluto in Aquarius, and we enter into hopefully moving toward eventually more collective ways of justice making and living in ways that are supporting the collective instead of a small group of people in power. And in our own life, Pluto is absolutely, we've all been on journeys with Pluto in those final degrees of Capricorn, breaking down those outdated structures, whether it's of patriarchal colonial capitalism and the way that most of us were brought up to think that that is the structure we should mold ourselves around, how we value success. And that's breaking down and helping us to expand beyond it. And so these are these collective energies, and that's some of the way that, you know, whatever's going on for us right now, and we're all going to have different stories, but that's some of the way that those collective energies are speaking to us individually. Now, these, you know, I speak on a channel that's all about healing and reclaiming and working and opening and alignment and not having to hide our spiritual selves and bringing it into our day-to-day life. Other folks are just going to talk about the shadow. In my experience, the people that I work with, they grew up in the shadow. A lot of us have childhood trauma. A lot of us have done a lot of work in therapy, and we're working or we're in that process. And at some point, I think we also go beyond those paradigms. And that's where I love to work with astrology. And that's the work I love to do with folks and individuals and groups. And that's why I focus on the way that these energies are inviting us to become conscious and open up. Now, collectively, not everyone wants to open up into bringing the spiritual into alignment with their daily practice. So we're also going to see some of that shadow energy in the collective, also in our own lives, where the shadow pops up, like with Neptune. Neptune, people are going to go straight to talking about the illusions, the addictions, illusions that also come through things like Hollywood and the way the media crafts a narrative of what our life is supposed to be, the way that we have a worshiping of celebrity culture, illusions in the way that trickles into our own sense of self. And maybe we're going to have some tension coming up there. We're absolutely going to see some of those themes in the collective. We're seeing them. And collectively, these three planets are also working to break that down and move towards more aligned ways of being in the individual and the collective. And my focus is to bring it back to how much radically changes when we as individuals embrace the life that we know on some level we are called to, that often it's much more a case of remembering than really figuring anything out or reorganizing. It's creating the space to remember that song that my soul knows every friggin' word to, every melody, and I just have to let it radiate through me. And the outer planets are wonderful at letting that song radiate in a vibrational way in different aspects of the psyche and the body. And we could really listen into that song, that soul song during this new moon and the week following it, taking us out as the sun moves in that direct contact within that kite form, but then the exactness is in the shift. Now I'm going into musical. Growing up with musicians and having a musician partner, my mind sometimes goes into thinking in terms of music, but there's going to be different planets are going to be bringing their melodies and harmonies coming as that sun moves through, and we're going to move from that exact Uranus to Neptune to Pluto. Okay. One last piece I want to mention for those that are still with me. YouTube tells me that that's not most of my folks, but there are some of you still here because I also really wanted to talk about Venus. Sweet Venus. So Venus has come out of her retrograde. She went into the underworld. She died and was rebirthed. And there was a part of us that was going on from July through to September 4th. She's direct now. And during this new moon, she is in an exact square with Jupiter. And she's conjunct the asteroid Juno, okay? And Juno and Venus are actually like this, doing this conjunction dance all through the rest of September into early October. Then Venus is going to move ahead in Virgo. But they are in Leo, and they're squaring that Taurus. So this is also another layer of energy that's coming in because Venus is also trining Chiron. And Chiron is in the practice I work with, also a co-ruler of Virgo energy. And Chiron is that wounded healer who's also retrograde. And Venus is trining that Chiron in Aries. So with Venus and Juno in Leo, there is so much energy of this reclaimed, passionate, creative self, about self-love that is coming straight from tapping into the divine energy flowing through me, that becomes something that speaks to me of my creative being, of my creative traits that I can have in this life. Juno is there as the goddess, yes, of marriage, but also just of commitments and where we hold ourselves with integrity. And there may be this, and they're squaring Jupiter. And so, there may be this desire really checking in with what shifted in the past 2 months around our creative desires for self-actualization. And they're squaring that Jupiter who's in Taurus, who's about manifesting, like expansion in the material realm, in life, in income, in the way we work, in our values, in our resources. And so it's a wonderful time to really feel how maybe, with that Taurus, with that Jupiter still in retrograde, to get insights into what's changed within us as Venus has come direct. And there might be a little push and pull, right? This cycle is part of bigger cycles. We've got those outer planets speaking to us. And we might not be ready to fully have the life that actualizes everything we're feeling in those Juno and Venus desires of creative passion, but we can definitely become aware of them, and we can absolutely plant intentions with them. Okay. It also, because Juno's there, if we are in committed partnerships, it is a time to check in with that and just feel, does my creative self get to shine in my partnership? And firstly, who is my creative self? Who is this person? What does he, they want? How do they want to shine? And then there might be some nudges to be like, oh yeah, I get to shine a little bit more in my creative way of being and in relationship with those I love. And so I'm going to stop there and sending you all new moon blessings, and be well.